It's time to change gears a little bit. With our next two speakers, we're going to spend some time thinking about artificial intelligence and disability. Just how accommodating is AI? It is my honor to introduce Dr. Vera Roberts, who is the Senior Manager, Research, Consulting, and Projects at the Inclusive Design Research Center of OCAD University, and Dr. I'm so sorry. And
Chris
yes,
Butler.
so it's my my privilege to introduce her. Go ahead, please.
Oh, look, they put our pictures on. I did not create that slide. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I haven't had a chance to just look through and make sure that Chris is here. Has he arrived? Can we double check that for a moment? Has anyone noticed if he checked in? I'm going to let you guys look to make sure Chris is there.
We'll double check that, Doctor, for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So thanks for
It
inviting me
doesn't
here.
appear so.
Okay, well, hopefully he'll join. If not, I know what Chris was going to talk about, and I can speak for him if he's not able to make it in. So I was asked to talk about artificial intelligence and disability with the sort of subtitle, just how accommodating is AI? And I looked at that and I thought, how do I want to talk about that today? And I knew why I had been approached to discuss it. It's because of a project that I'm working on called Future of Work and Disability. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But before I do that, I thought I would like to address the idea of language and how we're using it. And so if we could progress to the next slide, please. So I'd like to start first with a little bit about language. So accommodating is not a term that I would normally, or I don't use as much anymore. And I'm going to tell you why. So when I think about accommodating, I think about that as being implying a willingness to change or to meet someone's needs. And I think accommodation is great, and I want people to be accommodating, but it does sound a little bit like a special request. And I'm approaching this from a slightly different perspective, a bit of a shift. I'm approaching from an inclusive design perspective. And so I like to think about how inclusive something is. And it's my preferred term because we being the Inclusive Design Research Center where I hail from, but we believe that things should be designed for diverse needs. And the thinking around that in part is that if things are inclusive, if we design them to be inclusive and flexible, then accommodation is seldom needed. And so I just wanted to put that out there because I wanted to sort of address language because language matters. Language is an indicator of how we're thinking. And so accommodating is great. And I'm sure that there's a place for that word. But I also want people to think about the idea of shifting towards inclusive design and expecting inclusion in all that you do and in all the systems you participate in and having that expectation of others. Next slide, please. So Chris and I don't know if Chris arrives, hopefully he'll say hello, but Chris and I are part of a project called Future of Work and Disability. And the Future of Work and Disability project brought together a study group of 15 people, many with lived experience of disabilities, and with other researchers, artificial intelligence experts, data scientists, employment organizations, and others who are engaged in that data ecosystem, especially as it relates to employment and hiring and other aspects of work. And we covered a lot of topics in this study group. The study group was actually about an 8-week engagement. In fact, a little longer, but in terms of the intensive study was the first 8 weeks. And we alternated having public webinars with just study group activities the following week that would address a variety of topics like addressing bias and machine learning models for candidate selection, and making AI inclusive for human resources, tasks and professionals, and other aspects of inclusive artificial intelligence. And the study group would work together doing co-design, some independent activities, plus we attended these webinars. And I want everyone to know that the webinars that we provided were all recorded and are available on the Future Work and Disability website. And I'll give you the address for that a little bit later. But they're really, really terrific webinars. And in the time that we have, I can't really tell you all about what we learned about the future work and disability with regards to artificial intelligence and machine learning. There's not enough time today, but there's opportunity for anyone here to explore and learn the way we learned by watching some of our webinars. And those webinars include panelists like Sherry Truen from IBM, Ben Tamblin, Microsoft, Chancey Fleet, Rich Donovan, Realize participated, Nugget AI, they participated. They're not in our webinars, but they're in our study groups. Abhishek Gupta from the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, Julia Stoyanovich, Alexandra Reeve Givens. I think some of these names will be really familiar to you, and others not, but some really exceptional thinkers in the field. And if I were to present all of the things we learned, I'd really just be presenting their ideas. And I encourage all of you to go to the source and watch those webinars. Really some terrific ideas and learning around that. Next slide, please. So our project objectives were to explore, understand, and draw insights into how artificial intelligence and other smart technologies affect persons with disabilities and limit or improve their opportunities and well-being with regards to employment. And as part of that, we wanted to produce a report where we would share the insights that we gained through the workshop activities. And then finally, we wanted to inform the development of AI machine learning standards. So this work is done in part under a grant from Accessibility Standards Canada to help inform some of the federal standards that are coming as part of the federal accessibility legislation. And I'd like to take a moment to welcome Chris Butler, who's joined us. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
It's good to see you here. I'm glad you're able to make it. I've just
Thanks.
talked a little bit about what we were doing with the Future of Work and Disability Project. And one of the important things about that project is that inclusion, if we could go on to the next slide, please. Inclusion begins with including diverse perspectives. And Chris, your arrival is very timely because I was hoping that as one of the co-researchers that you would say a few words about the project. So Chris, how did you find working on this project?
I found that I learned the difference between inclusion and diversity.
Mm-hmm.
I find it quite intriguing.
And was there benefits to participating for you in terms of participating in the project? So when you were in the study groups, did you find it was beneficial for you?
It was.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you learned?
I learned through different people's perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
and with regards to employment to do with AI.
Mm-hmm. And can we go to the next slide, please? So these are some of the things that we covered. And Chris, you and I talked about some of the things that you learned in employment systems. So what do you want to help address this slide to talk about it?
I kind of learned all of the above: job searches, recruiting, application software, employee monitoring and training with John Guido.
Right, and John Guido was your support person in this project and helped you in some of the activities that we participated in. And these are all topics that we covered with a variety of individuals. And once again, I want to encourage everyone here to learn from the experts that we learned from. So we have the videos, and if you, oh, and you know what? I just realized that the link has changed. And so I'm providing a slide with the wrong link. That link might work, but it's actually now, instead of the dash future dash of dash work dash and dash disability, it's just HTTPS :// we count .inclusivedesign.ca /views /FWD. It's much more simple to remember. And if anybody wants that link, we can provide that again later on or afterwards. Maybe we can update the slide too. I'll see what I can do. So next slide, please. Thank you, Chris. So what we learned in part was that bias in AI-supported employment systems is a real problem. I think people suspect that, and I don't want to talk about AI machine learning as if it's a bad thing. There's lots of great things that can come from emerging technologies like this. Some have been around for a while, but they do need to be designed with inclusion in mind. Many AI and machine learning algorithms amplify bias, and they create barriers by failing to consider diversity. Some of the problems that we saw, for example, were gaps in employment, which can cause applications to be rejected before they are seen by human resources. We also learned a lot about video interview AI algorithms, which can reject candidates because their eye gaze, head or eye movements may not be typical. In the same way, online employment training testing software, it can disqualify candidates for the same reason, because they're moving or it looks like they're looking elsewhere instead of at the screen, or if they have a support person with them, then they're viewed as cheating and are disqualified. And so some of these automated processes for evaluating and interviewing candidates are very problematic. There's many other ways and other places where AI and machine learning come into the system. And that was something that was in the slide earlier that Chris was talking about, having learned about these things. It's in the job search, it's in recruiting, it's in the application software, it's in employee monitoring, it's in training, it's in the jobs that get posted to your email. And so these kinds of algorithms are all over the place, and if they aren't recognizing diversity or understanding where people are typical and atypical, then they can be very problematic. So we actually have a report coming out about this that I'll tell you where to find it again shortly, because this is by necessity glossing over to tell you the kinds of things we investigated, but not so much to tell you what we found. So the next slide, please. So the long and short of it is AI can be beneficial in employment systems, but we must make sure that we develop them to be inclusive of human diversity. The Future Work and Disability Report, of which Chris and many others are participating in the design and writing of, will be released next month. And I encourage all of you to visit the correct link, which is on this page, to go to the Future of Work and Disability site, not only to watch the videos and learn about the things that we learned, there's opportunities to participate. And this is also where we will release the report that helps to provide some guidelines around what we should be considering in standards development for using AI and machine learning within the employment ecosystem. And that's the end of my talk, and I'd be welcome any questions now if there are any. Oh, you talk, David, you're muted.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. I'm so sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you very much for your presentation. There's certainly important work to be done in developing inclusive systems. And thank you, Chris. Your expertise and perspective on technology and disability are invaluable. I'm going to open it up to any questions. Over to you, Melissa, to facilitate.
Thanks so much, David, and thank you, Vera, and thank you, Chris, for being a part of today. We truly appreciate your perspectives and the knowledge that you bring to our space. I have one question here in the Q&A and invite anybody else who's got something to type theirs in or raise a hand and ask it. The first question is, do you see any type of regulations with regard to bias and discrimination in the near future that might help eliminate or reduce the bias inherent with big data and machine learning models?
Yes, so there in the US, we're actually already seeing some regulations around this, and you'll have to forgive me because I should have prepared for a question like that. It's a good one, and so I can't cite the work that's being done specifically, but there is work to address bias by having systems of checks to look for bias. Right now, a lot of those systems, particularly in the US, these check systems. Focus on things like race and gender. Those aspects are a little easier to test for, but there is plans and work underway to develop systems of checks for a much more expanded definition of diversity. And within Canada, the work that we're doing is specifically towards development of standards. We're not developing the standards, but the work we do will inform standards. So this is on the radar for Accessibility Standards Canada. One of the interesting things about federal regulations is that they don't always have impact immediately and directly where we feel it most, because in Canada, many of the things that we concern employment are actually provincially regulated and are not federally regulated, unless you're an employee of a federally regulated organization. But there's always a trickle down domino effect. And so what we can see is that when a standard is developed in one area, especially within a country, it can then be taken on by other jurisdictions and repurposed and reused. So I do think you'll see standards coming. They're emerging in other countries, and you're going to see them here in Canada as well.
Thank you very much. I just have one more question, which is about episodic disabilities and artificial intelligence, and whether or not you've found anything at all in the research and the work that you've done.
Well, I mean, certainly one thing that comes up quite a bit for episodic disability is employment gaps. And so just from the hiring perspective, that the application perspective, those gaps in employments do cause individuals to be rejected from the application process, or really to not even make it through. And I think that this is a really interesting challenge. There does need to be better transparency in the sort of black box of algorithms that are being used to assess us when we're doing online tests, when we're filling in online applications. I do think that the transparency needs to be there. There probably is some movement towards that, but I think gaps in employment are a significant challenge for AI-based systems that look at that as just being not typical. And of course, gaps in employment happen for all kinds of reasons, and all valid and good reasons. So that's an area where I think episodic disabilities comes into play with AI machine learning. It can also be challenging if in systems that maybe are tracking performance or monitoring behavior, because it could be, if you have an episodic disability, that you need to sort of allot your work in a different way. Doesn't mean your work's not getting done, just maybe not done at the typical time, or you might need a longer break for various reasons to attend to your own needs around diet, etc., that could be related to your episodic disability. And I think that this is another area in monitoring systems where it can introduce unnecessary flagging of there being a problem. So yes, for sure, it's something we've seen, and I think there's probably more than what I've discussed. Some of this was actually touched on in some of our presentations, and some very, very, very good thinkers on the topics can inform you a bit more. So even if you don't have a chance to watch the webinar, perhaps check in some of the experts that were in, Julia Stoyanovich, Chancey Fleet in particular, and Alexandra Eve Givens, those ones in particular, I think might give you some insights for that area.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Vera, and thank you very much, Chris, for being a part of our event today. We truly appreciate your insights. It's always really interesting to learn a little bit more about how the future is shaping up and ways that we can be involved in kind of influencing and affecting little parts of that. Over to you, David.